On the night of May 11, 2012, a devastating fire tore through a quiet neighborhood in Derby, England. Within minutes, flames consumed a family home while desperate neighbors watched in horror. Inside the house were 6 sleeping children. Rescue crews fought desperately against the fire, but the smoke spread too quickly. By sunrise, every one of the children had lost their lives. The tragedy shocked the entire United Kingdom. Television stations interrupted their regular programming. Newspapers called it one of the country's worst house fires involving children in recent history. At the center of the tragedy stood a grieving father named Mick Philpott. Standing before television cameras, he cried openly as he thanked firefighters for trying to save his children. Millions of viewers believed they were witnessing the heartbreak of a devastated parent. But investigators would soon uncover evidence that transformed this heartbreaking accident into one of the most disturbing criminal cases in modern British history. The man everyone pitied would soon become the prime suspect. Long before the fire made international headlines, Mick Philpott had already become one of Britain's most controversial men. To some people, he was simply an unemployed father struggling to support a large family. But to others, he was a manipulative man who thrived on attention and control. Born in Derby, England, Philpott's life had been marked by violence and controversy long before he became known across the country. Court records showed that years earlier, he had been convicted after attacking a former girlfriend and her mother during a domestic dispute. Although those convictions painted a troubling picture, Philpott remained free. Over the following decades, he built an increasingly complicated family life that often attracted public curiosity. By the early 2010s, Mick Philpott had fathered 17 children with several different women. His unusual family arrangement frequently appeared in newspapers, making him one of the most recognizable welfare recipients in Britain. Television crews often visited the Philpott household. Mick appeared confident in front of the cameras, insisting that there was nothing unusual about the way he lived. He argued that he was simply providing for his children, despite growing criticism from the public. Behind the cameras, however, people who knew Philpott described a very different man. Former partners later told investigators that he demanded complete control over nearly every aspect of family life. According to testimony presented in court, decisions about money, relationships, and even parenting often revolved around him. Investigators would later argue that his need for control became one of the key motives behind the tragedy that shocked Britain. By early 2012, the carefully constructed image of the Philpott family was beginning to crumble. Behind the smiles shown to television cameras, relationships inside the house had become increasingly strained. Arguments grew more frequent, and trust was rapidly disappearing. One person had finally reached her breaking point. Lisa Willis, Mick Philpott's former partner and the mother of 5 of his children, decided she could no longer live under his control. After years of conflict, she packed her belongings and prepared to leave. Taking 5 young children with her, Lisa walked away from the home that had once promised stability. According to evidence presented during the investigation, she wanted to protect both herself and her children from an increasingly toxic environment. For most families, a separation marks the end of a difficult chapter. But investigators would later argue that for Mick Philpott, Lisa's departure represented something far more serious. It threatened the life he had spent years building. Lisa's decision also carried financial consequences. Because several of the children no longer lived in the house, the family's government benefit payments were expected to decrease significantly. Friends later described Mick as becoming increasingly angry and obsessed with reversing the situation. Witnesses later recalled that Mick blamed Lisa for everything that had happened. Instead of accepting the separation, prosecutors argued that he became consumed by the idea of forcing her to return, or destroying her reputation if she refused. Detectives believe that somewhere during those weeks, anger began to evolve into calculation. What started as resentment would soon become a carefully planned scheme, one that prosecutors said was designed to manipulate public sympathy while destroying the woman he blamed for his problems. As spring turned into early May, investigators believe Mick Philpott was no longer thinking about reconciliation. According to prosecutors, his focus had shifted toward a plan that would force Lisa Willis back into the public spotlight, but not in the way anyone could have imagined. Prosecutors later argued that Philpott came up with a shocking idea. He allegedly intended to start a small fire inside his own home, rescue the children before the flames spread, and then accuse Lisa of setting the blaze in an attempt to win custody. Investigators believe the plan depended on timing. The fire, they argued, was never supposed to become an uncontrollable inferno. Instead, it was allegedly designed to create a dramatic rescue that would make Philpott appear as a heroic father in front of the nation. According to evidence presented at trial, Philpott did not act alone. Prosecutors said he sought help from his wife, Mick Philpott, and a family friend named Paul Mosley. Together, they allegedly discussed how the plan would unfold. Detectives later reconstructed the timeline using witness statements, phone records, and forensic evidence. Piece by piece, they began assembling what they believed had happened before the fire ever started. At first, there was nothing unusual about the neighborhood. Families returned home from work. Children played outside. Streetlights flickered on as evening settled over Derby. No one could have imagined that, within hours, one of Britain's most heartbreaking tragedies would unfold. As darkness covered the neighborhood, 6 children went to bed, believing it would be just another ordinary night. None of them knew they were living through the final hours of their lives. Shortly after midnight on May 11, 2012, the Philpott family home was quiet. Inside, 6 children were asleep in their bedrooms, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. At approximately 4 a.m., a fire broke out near the front entrance of the house. Within moments, flames began spreading through the ground floor, filling the home with thick, toxic smoke. Smoke reached the upstairs bedrooms within minutes. Fire investigators later explained that toxic smoke often spreads faster than flames, leaving little time for people inside to react. Emergency calls brought firefighters to the scene within minutes. They arrived to find the front of the house completely engulfed in flames, while desperate efforts to reach the children began immediately. Fire crews entered the building despite the intense heat and collapsing conditions. Their only objective was to reach the children as quickly as possible. Despite their efforts, the conditions inside the house had become overwhelming. One by one, the children were brought out and rushed to waiting ambulances. Doctors fought to save the children after they were transported to the hospital. Tragically, all 6 later died from smoke inhalation. The oldest was 13 years old. The youngest was only 5. By sunrise, the entire country was waking up to heartbreaking news. 6 children had lost their lives in what many believed was a tragic accident. Few people could imagine that investigators were already beginning to ask difficult questions. As the smoke cleared, Britain united in grief. News of the devastating fire spread across television, radio, and newspaper headlines. Millions of people mourned the loss of 6 innocent children they had never met. Standing outside the burned house was 45-year-old Mick Philpott. Visibly exhausted, he struggled to hold back his emotions as reporters gathered around him. His voice trembled with grief. During television interviews, Philpott repeatedly thanked firefighters for risking their lives to rescue his children. His words appeared sincere, and many viewers were deeply moved by what they believed was the heartbreak of a devastated father. Donations began arriving from across the country. Flowers, handwritten messages, and children's toys were placed outside the family home as strangers paid tribute to the 6 young victims. For a brief moment, Mick Philpott became the face of unimaginable loss. Television audiences saw a father overwhelmed by grief, and few people questioned the tragedy that had unfolded. But while the public mourned, experienced fire investigators were examining the remains of the house. Their job was not to assume. It was to determine exactly how the fire had started. Almost immediately, several details caught their attention: the fire's point of origin, the speed at which it spread, and certain physical evidence did not fully match what investigators would normally expect from an accidental house fire. At first, those findings raised only questions, not accusations. But over the coming days, those questions would grow into one of the most shocking criminal investigations in modern British history. In the days following the fire, detectives from Derbyshire Police began what initially appeared to be a routine investigation. Every major house fire involving multiple fatalities is carefully examined. Nothing is ever left to assumption. Fire investigators focused first on the physical evidence. They carefully documented burn patterns, collected debris, and examined every room inside the destroyed house. Their goal was simple: determine exactly how the fire had started. As laboratory testing and forensic analysis continued, detectives interviewed everyone connected to the case. Family members, neighbors, firefighters, and emergency responders were all asked to describe exactly what they had seen that morning. At first, Mick Philpott fully cooperated with investigators. He answered questions, repeated his account of the night's events, and insisted the fire had been nothing more than a tragic accident. But as detectives compared witness statements with forensic findings, small inconsistencies began to emerge. Individually, they seemed insignificant. Together, they formed a pattern that investigators could not ignore. According to investigators, the physical evidence suggested the fire had started near the front entrance of the house. That location immediately raised an important question. If the main exit had been blocked so quickly, how had events unfolded inside the home? Investigators also reviewed emergency call records, mobile phone activity, and timelines provided by everyone involved. Piece by piece, the chronology of that morning became clearer. And with every new discovery, more questions were directed toward Mick Philpott. What had begun as a heartbreaking house fire was no longer being treated as a simple accident. Detectives were now considering a far more disturbing possibility, one that would soon transform public sympathy into national outrage. As detectives reconstructed the fire minute by minute, the evidence began pointing in a very different direction. Burn patterns, witness statements, and forensic analysis suggested this was not an accidental house fire. Investigators now believed the fire had been deliberately started near the front entrance, trapping everyone inside. Detectives then compared the forensic findings with Mick Philpott's version of events. The timeline didn't fully match. Small inconsistencies kept appearing, and what first seemed like minor details slowly became impossible to ignore. Phone records, witness interviews, and physical evidence all pointed investigators toward the same conclusion. The tragedy that had united Britain in grief was no longer being treated as an accident. It had become a criminal investigation, and the grieving father was now the center of it. As pressure mounted, investigators questioned everyone involved. Their attention focused not only on Mick Philpott, but also on his wife, Mourned, and family friend Paul Mosley. According to prosecutors, their accounts became increasingly difficult to reconcile with the evidence. Investigators eventually concluded that the fire had been part of a plan that went catastrophically wrong. Prosecutors argued that the intention had been to stage a dramatic rescue, blame Lisa Willis, and strengthen Mick Philpott's custody case. Instead, the fire spread far beyond anyone's control. On September 18, 2012, Mick Philpott, Mourned Philpott, and Paul Mosley were arrested on suspicion of murder. The father, who had once stood before television cameras asking for sympathy, was now facing accusations that shocked the entire country. The trial began in early 2013 at Nottingham Crown Court. Prosecutors argued that Mick Philpott had orchestrated the fire as part of a reckless plan to frame Lisa Willis and regain control over his family. They told the jury that what was intended to be a staged rescue had become a catastrophic disaster. Jurors were presented with forensic evidence, witness testimony, and expert analysis of the fire. Prosecutors argued that the evidence pointed to a deliberate act, while the defense challenged those conclusions. After weeks of testimony, the jury retired to consider its verdict. On April 2, 2013, the jury found Mick Philpott, Mick Philpott, and Paul Mosley guilty of manslaughter. The verdict marked the end of one trial, but not the public debate that followed. Mick Philpott was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term before parole eligibility. Mick Philpott and Paul Mosley also received prison sentences for their roles in the case. The judge described the events as an appalling tragedy, driven by selfishness and reckless disregard for human life. Outside the courthouse, reactions were immediate. Some believed justice had finally been served. Others struggled to comprehend how a family tragedy had escalated into one of Britain's most shocking criminal cases. Across the country, the case sparked conversations about domestic abuse, child protection, and the responsibilities of the welfare system. The tragedy became more than a criminal case. It became a national reflection. More than a decade later, the Philpott case is still remembered across the United Kingdom, not only because 6 young lives were lost, but because it revealed how manipulation, control, and reckless decisions can lead to unimaginable consequences. The investigation demonstrated the importance of careful forensic work. What first appeared to be a tragic accident was ultimately reconstructed through evidence, witness testimony, and the legal process. The case remains a reminder that conclusions must be based on facts, not first impressions. 6 children never had the chance to grow up. Their names are remembered not because of how they died, but because their lives mattered. And behind every headline, every courtroom, and every investigation, they remain the true story that should never be forgotten. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy true crime documentaries based on real cases, consider subscribing for more stories from history that reveal how truth is uncovered through evidence, not assumptions.